The Color of Loyalty, a Fable of Divided Ground. The porch swing in Shiloh, Kentucky had always been painted Union blue. Now in the spring of 1861, it was the only thing on the McCready farm that was. The rest, the land, the barn, the very air, seemed to belong to the gathering gray storm of the Confederacy. 18-year-old Elias McCready sat on that blue swing, his worn farm boots scuffing the dirt floor, listening to the argument he knew was inevitable. His older brother Samuel stood rigid in the doorway, a proud, furious shadow framed by the setting sun. "They are firing on the flag, Sam," Elias insisted, the words a raw thread between them. "They broke the Union. We cannot stand idle while treason tears the Republic apart." Treason? Samuel's voice was a low growl, honed by months of Southern rhetoric. "They are fighting for their homes, Elias, for states' rights, for their way of life. This land, this soil, it belongs to the South, and you, my own brother, want to put a Yankee boot on it?" Samuel gestured to the fields, now barren of everything but tension. He had already packed his saddlebags. He would ride south tomorrow to enlist with the Tennessee Rifles, convinced he was defending his honor. Elias knew he had to choose too. He stood up, his gaze steady on the blue paint beneath his feet. The gathering storm, a house of split pine, the night before Samuel left. Their mother baked a fruitless pie, a tradition for hard travel, but the silence around the dinner table was a heavy shroud. Elias remembered his father's last words before passing in the winter. "Above all, keep the Union." It was an oath the old man had taken decades ago, and it felt like a holy mandate to Elias now. When Samuel gripped his hand at the creek crossing, a final, fierce farewell, Elias simply said, "When this is done, Sam, let there be a country to come home to." A line drawn in the bluegrass, the weight of the oath. 3 weeks later, Elias stood in Cincinnati, not Tennessee. The crisp, clean fabric of his new blue Union uniform felt alien, almost blasphemous. But he had chosen a color, and with it, a cause. His unit was sent to Western Virginia, where the mountains offered only hardship and ambushes. The fighting was not grand parades. It was wet, hungry, and full of terror. He learned to load his rifle, to march, and to sleep while the sounds of battle echoed in the pines. Letters in the candlelight, echoes of home and horror. The only connection to his past was through coded letters passed via a neutral cousin. They were ghosts of conversation, clipped, careful, devoid of anything meaningful about the war. Elias never wrote about the stench of the field hospital or the sight of men tearing apart from grape shot. Sam never mentioned the gnawing hunger or the fierce pride of carrying the Confederate flag. They argued only once, briefly, over paper, a mention of Antietam. "A terrible price," Elias wrote, grieving the Union dead. "A necessary one," Sam replied, mourning his friends. "The ink bled like the wounds I forth. The price of principle, a reckoning on bloody ground." The reckoning came in the fall of '63 near Chattanooga. Elias's regiment was pinned down, and he saw a flash of butternut and gray leading a countercharge through the smoke. The face was older, harder, with a wild beard, but the eyes were unmistakably Sam's. A wave of sick horror froze Elias. His brother, carrying the very flag he had sworn to defeat, was running straight toward him. Elias raised his rifle, his hands trembling, a blur of blue and gray closing the distance. He aimed not at his brother, but at the ground beside him, firing a shot that was less a wound and more a warning. The sudden bark of the rifle, the near miss, caused Samuel to stumble and fall back into the confusion of the lines. Elias had held the Union blue, but had refused the final fatal act of loyalty to his uniform, V. Turning to the light, the slow mend of a nation. The war sputtered out a year later. Elias returned to Shiloh in a patched-up uniform. The blue faded to a tired, hopeful lavender. The porch swing was still blue. He found his mother gaunt but alive, waiting. Samuel arrived 6 months later, a defeated, hollow man with a limp and a piece of paper that swore his allegiance to the reunited states. They didn't speak of the moment at Chattanooga, nor of the deep schism that had torn their lives apart. Instead, Elias started mending the fence Sam had left broken. Sam, without a word, picked up the hammer and joined him. On the divided ground of the McCready farm, two brothers, clad in the faded colors of their separate loyalties, began the slow, painful process of hammering one small piece of the nation back together. A line, drawn in the bluegrass, the weight of the oath, the air above Shiloh. Kentucky was thick with the scent of late spring hay and the sourness of coming war. For generations, the McCready farm had been a refuge of peace in the bluegrass region, but now the ground itself felt divided. Brother against brother was not a proverb here. It was a daily reality. Elias McCready stood by the tobacco barn, watching his elder brother, Samuel, fit new horseshoes, shoes that Samuel claimed would carry him south to the Confederate camp at Bowling Green. "You're throwing away everything." "Sam," Elias pleaded, his voice cracking with a mixture of love and resentment. "This farm, your future, for a flag that stands for nothing but cotton and keeping men enslaved." Samuel slammed the hammer down, the metallic echo piercing the quiet afternoon. He straightened up, his eyes blazing blue fire, the same color as the Union coat Elias was contemplating. "Do not talk to me of flags, Elias. Talk to me of principle. The Union, as you call it, is nothing but a tyrant's fist, crushing the sovereignty of our state. Our father taught us to stand free. They fight for dominion. We fight for defense. Father taught us to stand together," Elias countered, remembering the last breath of the old man, a frail murmur urging the boys not to forget the whole nation. "He believed in the Republic, and I believe in Kentucky," Samuel roared, stepping closer. "When the cannon smoke clears, you will look around and realize you fired upon your own home. Choose your kin, Elias, or choose your politics, but you cannot have both." The ultimatum, stark and brutal, hung between them. It was the line drawn in the blue bluegrass, a demarcation no mere fence could repair. Elias closed his eyes, thinking not of politics, but of the oath his father had taken as a young man joining the militia, an oath to the Constitution, to the indivisible promise. That was the weight of the oath, a burden of loyalty heavier than family blood. He opened his eyes. "Then I choose the oath that holds the country together." The next morning, the silence was absolute. Samuel rode south before dawn. By noon, Elias had saddled his own horse and pointed it north toward Cincinnati. When he arrived at the bustling Union recruiting office, the sounds of industry and the sight of countless young men in federal blue gave him a desperate sense of purpose. He signed his name, Elias McCready, volunteer, and was handed a stiff new uniform. But the true commitment came when the recruitment officer called them to attention. "Raise your right hand and repeat after me," the officer commanded, as Elias recited the solemn vows to bear true allegiance to the United States of America, to serve faithfully against all her enemies and opposers, to obey the orders of the President. The words felt less like a promise and more like a permanent severing. With each syllable, the distance between Elias and his brother grew insurmountable. He had exchanged the soft loyalty of family for the hard, unforgiving loyalty of principle. The coat was the color of Union blue, but the weight he now carried was the bitter knowledge that, by serving his country, he had become an enemy to his own blood. Elias McCready was now a soldier, standing on divided ground, having chosen an oath that left him irrevocably alone. The war had begun, and its first, silent casualty was the peace of the bluegrass. Letters in the candlelight. Echoes of home and horror. The winter of 1863 settled over the Army of the Potomac like a shroud of freezing mist. Corporal Elias McCready of the Union Army sat hunched in his damp tent, the canvas offering little defense against the cold and less against the memories. The only source of light and warmth was a sputtering candle stub, casting his shadow, long and distorted, on the tent wall. He held a letter, the paper thin and fragile, smelling faintly of the bluegrass soil he hadn't touched in nearly 2 years. It was from his mother. "My dearest Elias," the letter began, the familiar script trembling slightly. "The orchard flowered early this year, but the scent holds no joy. The raiders passed again last week, took the last of the corn. I miss your laugh, son. The house is too quiet, and the swing is still blue, though the paint is peeling now. Write soon, so I know the uniform still fits and that you are whole." Elias read the words twice, then thrice, letting the simple domestic details, the peeling paint, the too quiet house, buffer him against the day's stark horror. Just 3 days prior, they had faced a brutal artillery barrage. He closed his eyes and could still hear the sickening thud of shells striking the earth, the screams that followed, and the rasping breath of the man beside him who died with a picture of his wife clutched in a frozen hand. He dipped his pen in the ink pot, his knuckles stiff. His duty was not just to fight, but to lie. Letters in the candlelight. Echoes of home and horror. My dearest mother, thank you for your letter. It arrived just as the snow began, and the thought of the orchard brought warmth. The uniform still fits, though it's more brown than blue these days. We are mostly mending fences and moving supply wagons. Don't worry over the swing. I will paint it new when I return. Tell me again about the mare's new foal. Is she as lively as her mother? The days are quiet here. Pray for all the boys, north and south. Your loving son, Elias. He folded the letter neatly, omitting the truth, that mending fences meant burying fallen comrades, that moving supply wagons meant marching through the bloody mud of a contested trench, and that his days were quiet only between the explosions. He dared not mention the fever that had weakened his company, nor the fear that was a permanent resident in his gut. But the most difficult ghost he kept from the page was Samuel. His mother had mentioned him just once in an earlier letter, vague and agonizingly neutral. Your brother sent a card from some place called Vicksburg. He is well, but thin. Elias knew Vicksburg had fallen to the Union months ago after a long, brutal siege. He didn't know if Sam had survived the surrender or if he was now languishing in a prison camp, angry and broken. Elias reread his mother's letter one last time. He imagined her sitting in their dimly lit kitchen, the candlelight flickering over her hands as she searched for words of hope. He realized his words were not just a shield for her. They were a lifeline for him. By inventing a quiet, peaceful version of his life, he kept a small, sane piece of the bluegrass alive in the heart of the battlefield. He sealed the envelope with wax. Outside, a picket guard shouted a cold, hollow challenge into the night. Elias blew out the candle. In the utter darkness, the echoes of home and the echoes of horror finally merged, leaving him to face the night with nothing but the weight of his oath and the memory of a blue porch swing. The price of principle. A reckoning on bloody ground. The air at Chickamauga was not air. It was smoke, sulfur, and the sound of 1,000 men screaming in unison. It was September 1863, and the fields of Georgia had become a slaughterhouse. Corporal Elias McCready, now a veteran of the Union line, moved through the choking haze, reloading his rifle with a speed born of desperation and instinct. His company was broken. The Confederate charge had been ferocious, driving the Federal flank back through the woods in panicked disarray. Elias knew this was the end of the line. The battle for this cursed piece of ground would be decided right here, right now. He crouched behind a pile of dead timber, his vision blurred by sweat and grime. Suddenly a voice, raw and commanding, cut through the din, closer than any enemy should be. "Hold the line, boys! Give 'em cold steel for the Confederacy!" Elias froze. The voice. It was deeper, roughened by war and yelling. But the timbre, the precise, authoritative ring, was unmistakable. Samuel. His brother emerged from the smoke, not as the angry farm boy idealist who had ridden south, but as a grizzled Confederate sergeant. He was leading a small, desperate charge, his bayonet fixed, his face set in a mask of brutal, unwavering resolve. He was just 20 yards away, a man of gray uniform and blood-soaked purpose, running straight toward the Union position. Elias's rifle slipped, the cold steel burning his palms. All the letters, all the lies, all the distance they had placed between themselves collapsed into a single, terrifying moment. This was not a reckoning of armies. This was a judgment between brothers. The price of principle. A reckoning on bloody ground. Elias raised his rifle again. He had taken an oath to the Union, an oath he had honored with every waking, freezing, starving day for 2 years. His principle was the indivisibility of the nation. The price of that principle now stood before him, demanding to be paid in blood. He sighted down the barrel. He could end the threat, and perhaps the terrible civil war raging in his own heart. But the image was not of an enemy combatant. It was of a boy on a blue porch swing, tossing a baseball, and the fierce, loving fire in his brother's eyes. Just as Samuel lifted his rifle to fire at the Union men visible over the logs, Elias shifted his aim. He didn't fire at his brother. He fired at the Confederate flag standard Sam was following, the brass finial shattering with a loud crack. The impact was enough. The Confederate standard-bearer screamed and stumbled, dropping the heavy flag. The momentum of the small charge wavered, their guidepost lost in the smoke. In that half-second of confusion, a Union corporal next to Elias took his chance and fired a clean, fatal shot at a different Confederate soldier near Samuel. The shot passed close enough to Samuel's ear to make him flinch and turn. For a heartbeat, their eyes met across the bloody ground. Blue uniform staring into gray uniform. Brother looking at brother. Elias's face offered no comfort. No plea, only a look of profound, agonizing regret. It was a silent, terrible communication. "I chose the oath, Sam, but I will not be your executioner." Samuel understood. A look of fierce hatred mixed with a flicker of something unreadable, perhaps gratitude, perhaps deeper betrayal, flashed in his eyes. He screamed a frustrated curse, scooped up the fallen flag, and dragged his remaining men back into the woods. Retreating from the unexpected pause in their momentum, Elias slumped against the timber, his body shaking. He had upheld his oath. He had defended the line. But the victory felt hollow. He had paid the price of his principle, not with a bullet, but with the terrifying, isolating act of choosing the nation over the deepest bond of blood, and then sparing the very enemy his oath demanded he destroy. The bloody ground of Chickamauga had taken everything from him, leaving behind only the unbearable weight of his divided loyalty. Turning to the light. The slow mend of a nation, it was the summer of 1865. The cannon fire had ceased, the flags were furled, and the Union blue that Corporal Elias McCready wore was faded, almost gray itself. He walked the final mile to Shiloh, his boots kicking up the familiar dust of the bluegrass road, his discharge papers a crinkle of useless promises in his pocket. The oath was fulfilled, the nation saved, yet Elias felt entirely broken. When he reached the farm, the sight was worse than any battlefield ruin. The fields were overgrown, the barn roof sagged like a tired animal, and the old porch swing, the last bastion of Union Blue, had fallen, its ropes rotted, resting in the weeds. His mother, frail and aged beyond her years, wept on his shoulder, her relief a quiet, painful thing. Samuel? Elias finally managed to ask, the name thick with the guilt of Chickamauga. "He came back 3 months ago," she whispered, pulling him inside. "He's in the back room. He's changed." Turning to the light. The slow mend of a nation. Samuel lay on a narrow cot, one leg rigid and useless, his face a hollow echo of the fierce young man who had ridden south. He looked like the Confederate dead Elias had left scattered across Georgia. When their eyes met, there was no hatred, no accusation, only the shared, bone-deep exhaustion of having fought a long, devastating war against everything, including each other. "You came back, too," Samuel rasped, his voice a dry, unused sound. "I came back," Elias affirmed. There was no talk of politics, no mention of the battlefield, and certainly no mention of the shot Elias had intentionally missed. The war was over, and the only remaining battle was against the wilderness taking over their home. For weeks, they lived in a silent, armed truce. Elias worked the fields alone, clearing the scrub with a borrowed plow. Sam watched from the porch, unable to help. One blistering afternoon, Elias was struggling to lift a fallen section of the barn's heavy roof beam. He heard the scrape of crutches.